Hey guys, welcome back. Today's video is going to be all about little mini Vanda orchids that you can grow indoors. I've been growing different kinds of Vandas for a couple of years now. I've learned a lot about them. Some of them I've gotten to bloom. Some of them are struggling like this one. So in today's video, I'm going to share some Vandas that I find very easy to bloom indoors. Some other Vanda types that I struggled with, but kind of figured out what I needed to do to get them to thrive. And in general, how to take care of Vandas indoors. With that said, let's jump right in. Okay, so why grow Vanda orchids? I find that they are super fragrant. They're really nice. When I went to the Tamiami Orchid Festival a couple of years ago, I smelled some huge Vandas. They were gorgeous. They were enormous. And the thing with Vandas is that they come in all sorts of different sizes. So there's some really big floofy Vandas, and then there's kind of smaller ones that you could grow in a pot. You can grow any type indoors, but the care is going to be different. So when I went to the Orchid Festival in Miami, I noticed a lot of these Vandas were huge and they were bare roots. So you guys know the drill. Orchids need lots of water, but they need lots of air. So the roots need to have constant humidity, constant moisture. And with Vandas, that's crucial. So a lot of folks in Florida can grow them outdoors because it's so humid. They can grow them in their backyards and then hose them down every morning. Here in New York, we don't have that luxury. So unless you have the time, which if you have the time, then you can just soak your Vandas constantly. But I don't have the time for that. So you can grow Vandas indoors if you're able to give their roots lots of moisture, but lots of air. Now it becomes challenging, especially in the winter, when I'm looking at my meter over there by my window, it's 28% humidity, which is just too low. So you might be having to soak your Vandas twice a day, spray them down. So Vandas like humidity in general. You can pot your Vandas up, but if you're potting them up, they don't want to stay wet. So you have to pot them up in something that dries really fast. So you can pot a big Vanda up in very chunky mix, but then you have to water it when it gets dry, but it can't stay too wet. So I stay away from the bigger Vandas just because I don't have the time to personally water them that heavily. Now, when it comes to light, Vandas, generally the big ones, they like loads of light beyond Cattleya level light. You don't want to give them direct sunlight, but I think you can acclimate them over time to heavier and heavier, closer to direct sunlight. I've seen some growers talk about that, but they need very bright light. You can grow them under LED lights, of course. I've gotten my mini Vandas to bloom. They need a little less light than some of the bigger Vandas under LED lights, but you can use your regular grow lights, provided your lights are very close to the Vanda. That will generally help get them to bloom. But the first thing you got to take care of are those roots. You want to water them, make sure they don't stay too wet, make sure they have lots of air, and then constantly water. So that's why I stay away from the big ones. Now, a couple of years ago, I got a box of little mini Vandas from Orchid Classics. You can check out the unboxing right here. And all of these came potted up in like bark and perlite. They bloomed, but what I noticed is that they were pretty much Neofinetia falcata mixes. So I want to talk about those because I find that those are very easy to grow. Neofinetia falcata orchids are a little bit different than the big Vandas in that they don't need... The bigger Vandas need lots of light. They need the roots have to be pretty humid, but they have to dry as well. So that's a little tougher. These are the Neofinetia falcata types, and they are a bit different than the larger Vandas. They're a bit different than the larger Vandas in that they don't need warm to hot temperatures. They could be okay in hot temperatures, but they also tolerate intermediate conditions. In addition, they don't need as much light as the bigger Vanda types. So I started getting crosses with Neofinetia falcata in them, and I noticed that the orchids that I got from that box had Neofinetia falcata, and a lot of them rebloomed. It was lovely. The fragrance on this it's so hard to explain, but it's like an elegant perfume. When it blooms, it's like jasmine. They're nocturnal fragrant usually, white flowers or pink flowers. Lots of variety on these, but I find that they're very easy to grow. Now, this one is the Vanda Twinkle. I believe this is the cross between the Neofinetia falcata and the Ascocentrum miniatum. So I believe if you're growing indoors, if you get either a Neofinetia falcata, these are quite easy, or if you get a cross with Neofalcata in them, those are going to be a little bit more forgiving than those very high humidity loving vandas. Now again, you can grow those bigger vandas indoors, but you have to keep the care in mind. You have to stay on top of the air that those roots need versus the dry time, and they can't stay dry too long, so you got to water, but they got to dry. So ideally they're bare root or in chunky mix, but you have to water constantly. These are way more forgiving as a new grower. So when I first got my box of orchids from Orchid Classics, some of them were in bloom. They were wonderful. Some rebloomed a bunch of times. But then I was thinking, these orchids need to dry fast, but I can't water them that often, but I'm going to keep them potted up. So what I did was I set them up in a clay pot with coconut husk. Unfortunately, the coconut husk wouldn't retain too much moisture, so they stayed dry too long, and some of my orchids died. Not only that, but I was going through some stuff a couple of years ago, like 2 years ago, and I could not take care of my collection, so I lost quite a bit of my vandas. And it's not that vandas are hard to grow, they just need to remain watered properly. And they don't have the storage units that a dendrobium or a cattleya has, so you can abandon a cattleya or a dendrobium for weeks, maybe even a month. And they'll suffer a little bit, but they'll stay alive. Like most of my collection when I abandoned it a couple of years ago, it stayed alive, but I lost quite a few of my vandas. Now this one was abandoned, but it stayed alive, so this is a vigorous one. This one is the Vanda Twinkle. But I decided when I started growing that I needed something to dry fast but retain moisture. So I started growing them in sphagnum moss with clay pots, and I found that that worked well for my environment. So why moss in clay pots? Well, clay pots are very wicking. Moss retains lots of moisture. When I water, this is dry within 2 days, and that's perfect. And it does really well for me. I'm really liking this combination in my environment. It's going to be different in every environment. In the summer, it's really hot in the grow room, so this dries out very fast, but it's still able to get lots and lots of moisture. I don't water super, super often. Nowadays, I'm watering like once or twice a week. If I water it twice a week, it's usually fine. So it gets lots of moisture, but still kind of dries out pretty fast, and it's okay. Okay, so as I said, for the temperatures of vandas, they like it generally warm. The Neofinetia falcata types can take cooler temperatures, which is nice. Now, these are from Japan, China, around there. And vandas in general, I believe, are from Asia in general. But these come from places that have cooler temperatures, so that's kind of nice, especially if you don't have hot conditions. They need good humidity, but they need to dry out, as I said. You can't keep them constantly moist. And these can stay dry for a little while, and it's not usually a big problem like the bigger vandas, in my opinion. I really like these because I just find that when you bloom them, they just smell so good. And then, like I said, the crosses are super easy to grow. I got one that was messed up. This one was an import that was in bad shape, so it doesn't look the best, but it bloomed for me. This is the loose Neri. So this had no roots when I got it, but it's finally pushing through. When you get an orchid that's not in great shape, sometimes it takes years to come back. Sometimes it won't come back. So keep that in mind. If you get something and it's like declined, it's not on you if you can't get it to bloom. It's not on you if you can't rehab it. I'm not sure. Was that a bird? I don't know. It's not on you if you can't rehab it. Sometimes like this, I got 3 years ago and it's still struggling. I tried growing them in semi-hydro, not ideal. They don't like to stay wet. I mean, I tried it for a long time. At first, my Neofinetia falcatas were good. Then 2-3 years later, they did not do well. So they really prefer their wet dry cycles. I think eventually in the very long term, they end up declining. You could check out all my old videos. I was so excited about growing in semi-hydro and it just didn't work out for me, especially with my vandas. And like in the beginning, they adapted, they grew roots, but they eventually all started declining and declining very quickly. So in the long run, it's just not a good grow method. You want them to have their wet, dry cycles and lots of humidity. So in terms of minis to grow indoors, there are so many that I've bloomed. Again, kind of sad that I lost a few of them. In 2022, I just couldn't take care of my collection very well. And I didn't water very often, and I feel kind of sad about it because I lost about half of them. But I bloomed my Vanda peaches. That was so beautiful. Very, very pretty. I bloomed several Neofinetia falcatas. I bloomed Vanda Paki by Vanda Neofinetia falcata. That was very, very nice to smell. But anything crossed with Neofinetia falcata or Neofinetia falcata is generally wonderful. And to recap the care on these, put them in a potting mix that you can water, but it won't stay too soggy wet. And that's going to be different for your environment. For me, usually I like the moss on some of these Vandas, but for my Neofinetia falcatas, some of them I have in a mixture of bark and moss. But generally, they're in bark and moss if they're not in a clay pot. So this will dry pretty quickly. I water it when dry. They get a day-night temperature differential of about 10 degrees, which comes naturally because these are under LED lights. The LED lights keep everything warm, and then when they go off at night, then it's 10 degrees cooler. And then these bloom multiple times a year. The fragrance, amazing. So if you're struggling, get yourself some Neofinetia falcatas or get a cross with Neofinetia falcata. You'll have success. And then down the line, you could try some of the bigger Vandas. Now, I would love to try a bigger Vanda. I don't have the space right now, and I don't really want to care for something that needs a lot of water but air. So like in short, I don't want to be stuck watering something every single day or every other day. So that's just me. These orchids really like their fertilizer. So especially the big ones, they have big, thick roots. Those want lots of fertilizer. The Neofinetia falcatas, they have little thin roots. They're not as heavy on the fertilizer, but if you grow one, if they have big, big roots, usually they want more and more fertilizer. So that's something to keep in mind. They grow big structures. Fragrance, amazing. But yeah, for me, it's not in the cards right now to grow a big one, but the mini ones, they're amazing. And if you grow bigger Vandas indoors, how do you care for them? I want to know down below. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everyone.